that. I think it's only 3% of North America that is actually populated or is actually an urban area, has houses and roads and civilization in it. So if you can imagine that other 96, 97% of essentially wilderness or farm fields or just fields in general, it can get quite desolate or quiet very quickly. Cornfields, in fact, are quite frightening to a lot of people, just because they make a lot of noise on their own with just the subtlest amount of air movement. But yes, I am Mike Bass, author and illustrator of Frightful Folklore of North America, a fun little collection of folk horror from all of North America, so Greenland on down to the Panama Canal. I am a printmaker, an artist by trade and education. I received my BFA, Bachelor of Fine Arts, in printmaking and design from the University of Wisconsin up in Eau Claire. If you're not familiar with Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin, they have a network or a group of schools that all kind of specialize in certain fields, and Eau Claire is design and art. I do create a lot of artwork. I post my artwork as well as short tales on my Instagram page, Wisco Mythos. It's on the back of the book, as well as on my website, inkandstory.com. I welcome you to follow both. And I also sell my art at shows around the United States, as well as most weekends here in Madison at the Farmers and Artists Market. It's one of the larger public markets in the States, actually, and I'm happy to be a part of it. So if you're ever in Madison on a Saturday between April and October, you may very well find me in my stand selling prints and other fun folklore related items. And I do live here in Madison, Wisconsin, with my wife, Natalie, and we own a small gift shop called Zip Dang, where at zipdang.com, you can actually purchase prints of my artwork and very soon prints from the book. So those are coming as soon as we get those all set up. Daniel, I know you're thinking about the Rougarou. So today I thought I'd start by talking about one of my favorite subjects, and hopefully one of yours as well, fear. Fear is actually literally one of the reasons we're actually here today. And it's not, to hear about it and talk about it, but we're here because of our ancestors' ability to recognize it, to recognize the signs of it, the goosebumps, the hair on your arm raising, the tingly feeling on our spines, heart racing, pulse quickening, sweaty palms, eyes dilated, heightened senses. It's these sensations, quite ancient and old sensations that reside in the very base part of our psyche, that separated who made it here today and who did not. We who had ancestors roaming around when humans were not the only apex predator, that were able to recognize the sensations of fear and to understand that when all of these things happened, that it meant danger was near, and they sought out shelter or safety, are the ones who had descendants and who eventually led to us. And those humans at the time that did not recognize those sensations did not, and so they did not. Those folks did not survive into the modern era. So although the early humans' responses to fear around 10 to 20,000 or 10 to 20 millennia ago saved lives, today we mostly view fear as somewhat of an amusement park ride. In the comfort of our homes, sitting safely on our couches, we sort of actively seek it out in many situations. And we do this because we enjoy the excitement of it, the thrill of it, and in most part because it brings excitement in a life that is somewhat devoid of major threats and danger. And the wonderful thing about that is that today, in the safety of our homes, we're able to shut it off if the fear becomes too intense. If we reach our limit, we're able to, put the book down, to turn the podcast off, or turn the channel to a different station and watch something a little less terrifying. And it's part of a joy of what we do. And in fact, that's basically how all of this started for me. I never specifically set out to create folk horror or scary folklore, but I did at a young age start to lean into spooky stories, ones of monsters and cryptids and hauntings and tales of the unknown. And I started to sort of venture into the darker corners of folklore. And I think at first, as an adult, this helped me put a face and a name onto the things that frightened me as a child. Sorry, the light's kind of coming in at a bad angle there. And it helped me kind of to deal with things from my childhood that frightened me. But over time, I stuck with it because I liked it. And when I found myself in college and I found art and I began to find my voice, I found both of those through a strong connection to history. Being able to sort of dig deeper into tales and the culture of my surroundings, basically at that time starting with Wisconsin, I was able to sort of dismiss spooky things and frightening things. For instance, I was raised Catholic in a Catholic family and attended 8 years of Catholic school. So I spent much of my childhood being told somewhat horrifying stories by what were seemingly rational adults. So as I began to look into the history of the world and the history of things, I was able to sort of find stories and find tales and find commonality in various cultures, villains, that sort of allowed me to debunk some of the more terrifying tales that we were told. And in fact, as you dig deeper into some of the stories here, you actually find that much of the scary aspects of Christianity are actually due to sort of early folk horror by Milton and others that are not even actually included or in the original stories from the Bible. So discovering these things and delving into folklore and history, I discovered themes and tangents that help stabilize in adulthood what had been an unstable existence in my childhood. So being able to kind of wade into fear in a controlled environment helped me rationalize the irrational. So it did for me kind of what medicine would do for illness or a vaccine would do to prevent disease. I found it as a remedy as I moved forward. Did more of it. And the more I lingered in these darker corners of folklore, the more I fell in love with it. So I found that in folklore, I liked mainly not only the stories that were frightening, but tales that took me to a place that had that kind of aha moment. Tales that led somewhere that allowed us to, at the end of the story, connect all the actions that had led up to that particular ending. There was a sort of satisfaction in seeing how choices, good or bad, throughout the entire tale sort of led to an outcome, whether it was a fortunate outcome or a bad one. So I guess you could say that in terms of folklore, I like tales that have a lesson, because those are the ones that sort of give me a clue, or give me a sign of what the people who chose to retell those stories feared. It shows me what kind of drove them, to lock their doors at night, to tuck their children in, um, and to sort of at a base level, um, try to keep themselves safe. Uh, and I know that in a lot of ways, I was able to see too that these tales, and these stories were different from one culture to another. But it was nice. It was interesting to see at the time the root, of the danger or the fear that kind of filled that hole for them. One of the things that is a good example of that is the is names, specifically gaining advantage through knowing a person or an entity's name. And we see out through time and in many regions and many cultures that there's a power in finding out that person's name, or withholding one's own name. We're all too familiar with the tale of Rumpelstiltskin. Never promise your firstborn in trade for a bit of woven gold. But as we look through many other cultures, we also see several other stories that are related to the same thing. There's Tom Tit Tot, and in fact, he was simply happy to just have the maiden herself as the prize. But there's also Double Turk, there's Hoslerine, Bone Fraulein, Nagan Doomer. I have a list here. Whoopity Story, Kulger, Papatikin, and Zerk. All of these stories lead to a particular character or creature, typically a dwarf or an elf, that is trying to gain some sort of advantage or end prize by concealing their name. Even in Christianity, we know where you can render angels and demons powerless by discovering their names. And in the Great Lakes region of North America, the Algonquin people have a character called the Bear Walker. It's an evil shaman who uses bad medicine, which is their magic, to gain the ability to shapeshift. And while in their bear form, they conduct their nefarious deeds. And the only way to break their spell or to overcome their magic is to discover their true name and use it against them. Oops, sorry. This. So, I mean, as we look at that, it's not hard to sort of decipher the lesson we're supposed to learn there, and that is that knowing your neighbors is important. Knowing who the people are around you keeps you safe, and that it's not to say you shouldn't trust a stranger, but you should at least be able to introduce yourself, get their name, know who they are, and keep your community kind of in the know of who is all around you. And so this is where we kind of get to to the most interesting aspects of North American folklore, and one of the reasons I really enjoyed this book. And it is that in a relatively short period of time, I would say over 200 to 300 years, we find this wild mingling of stories of different cultures, all with their own sort of localized and culturally significant variations to themes and to in ways to define basic human fears. And they're all seen through those people's particular lenses and through their traditions and customs and what they held sacred. And so we see over that span of a few hundred years, not only that these beliefs quickly became close neighbors, but they collided with each other. They smashed into each other, they were broken and they were rebuilt and pieced together all over again, into what is sort of a unique North American set of tales. So when all of these cultures and histories and tales get tangled up and retold, they're not only told by different storytellers, but they're told in different accents and different languages. And this allowed these fears to adapt to a new reality, to these new surroundings, and to the new people that everyone was discovering at the time in North America over those 200 years. So this is true for those who had just arrived on the shores, as well as those who had been here for centuries, the indigenous folks that were here. And for these people, everything changed. Their fear changed. Stories of fear evolved and thrived, retold regardless of any language barrier, recognized and translated through the look on the storyteller's face. If you didn't understand the language, you still knew stories were scary because of the storyteller's actions and their performance. And of course, fear grew through people's experiences. One of the prime examples of how stories evolved based on language is that of the snallygaster. It comes from Frederick County, Maryland, and the snallygaster is not in the book. It's kind of a it's not as scary today as it was obviously for the folks that lived in Frederick County, Maryland in the early 1700s. But Maryland was at the time settled mostly by German immigrants who were being terrorized by this creature, this half bird, half lizard creature that was snatching up people in the middle of the night and running away with them. It was not only a large creature, but it was a fast creature. So the name that they gave this particular terror was Schnellergeist, which means quick ghost. So over time, as it is with most of North America, more English-speaking immigrants moved into the region, and the stories of the Schnellergeist continued to be told and retold, but now not only in German, but in English. So, of course, with the new language, they also began to evolve. The beast itself now had a metallic beak, was lined with razor-sharp teeth, and had octopus tentacles that came out of its mouth that allowed it to snatch up people, grab them, and pull them into its maw and devour them. But not only had the story become more sensationalized through the translation, but the name of the creature also went through this sort of wild game of multilingual telephone, going from German to English to German to English to German, and going back and forth. And somehow, Quick Ghost or Schnellergeist over the decades of retelling became the Snallygaster. So even to this day, it's still called the Snallygaster, and it's still a cultural and folkloric icon in Central Maryland. And you'll find it painted on barns. They sell T-shirts. There's even a popular beer festival in Washington, D.C. that celebrates the Snallygaster. It's actually called that, and they sell a beer called Snallygaster. So when we start looking at the tales from the book, there are definitely a lot of stories that are pure in their nature, meaning that they were told by a particular culture or group, and it remained somewhat the same throughout the centuries. But I find some of the more interesting ones to be those that are sort of those cultures colliding and their fears sort of creating different takes on the region, the area, or even the tales that were there previously. Some of these you can see like are the Banshee of the Badlands. The Badlands is this extremely rough area out in North Dakota and South Dakota. It kind of comes down. It's the area where it used to be a seabed, and now what's left is basically what you would find on the bottom of the ocean in the middle of a massive expanse of the West. And when settlers crossing the plains found this area, they found it to be very inhospitable and also incredibly hard to traverse. And so when we see the Banshee of the Badlands, we kind of have that whole sort of tales from Ireland and northern UK of the banshee in this territory or this land that is desolate and very difficult. And we all know that the banshee is here to sort of warn us or to tell us of impending doom or possible death of a family member or friend. And so we have tales of this banshee that's in this area that's constantly warning the folks passing through of the trouble that's there. We also have, and I don't want to give away too many spoilers in the book, obviously, if you haven't already read it, but I'm just going to talk about a few of the other characters and not necessarily get to the ending or the frightening part of it. But the Phantom Conquistador in Mexico City is again the tale of this ghost conquistador who is still haunting an alley to this day. And we kind of look into the reasons for that, and we find that there are reasons for this that stem back to the time when Spain was working its way across the entire area of Mexico. And Corriveau, I'm not really good at the French here, but is a tale of a woman who was alive at a time when the French were giving up most of Canada to Britain. And there was this great transfer of power and rules and the law of the land. And we see a tale of a woman who was caught in the middle of that. And so the folklore that kind of surrounds her is that of this turmoil, this time when she was charged under the French regime and punished under that of British rule. And you'll find tales like this throughout the entire book. One of Daniel Culver's favorite is the Rougarou. And we see that is a strange Creole bastardization, I guess you could say, of a loup-garou, which is the French word for a werewolf. In fact, in Canada, the name loup-garou stayed. They actually still use that there. But down in the southern parts of the US, in Louisiana and where Mississippi, where we find Creole culture, the name just slowly sort of evolved to this Rougarou pronunciation and spelling. But they have the very same, they have the very same or similar qualities in that they are, for one reason or another, afflicted with this curse that makes them into a werewolf type creature, whether it's in Canada, a full wolf shape, or in the South, in Louisiana and Mississippi, half man, half wolf. So giant wolf head and massive man body or human body. So these are the tales that are in the book, and these are the things that sort of fascinate me about fear and how it came to or existed or evolved in North America. And I find it just fascinating at how the cultures that were here and the cultures that came and the cultures that then sort of evolved in North America, how they sort of created this new sort of environment of folk horror and fear. So that's what I have about the book. I'm happy to take questions or answer questions and comments or talk about more of what I'm into and how I came to pick the stories and tales that I did. So have at it. You're asking me what my favorite child is. I really like Corriveau, even though I can't pronounce it in an instant. I practiced that for about an hour last night, and I still can't say it. I think because her story and her tale is one that is so full of woe and has certainly um, evolved through sensationalism throughout the entirety of um, the time after her death. Um, and her story is that, she was married young. She was an Arcadian, so she was in France, or New France, in the area around Quebec. And as it occurred quite a bit in the frontier days, um, she lost her husband, and she had children, and so she sought out not only for her protection but also for um, uh, the I guess survival rate. People who didn't have that kind of network back then. And I'm sorry about this light. I hope it's not going to hurt your recording, but it's just sort of raking in through that window. She found another husband. This particular fellow was not as nice as her previous husband, and he eventually died. And it's not sure how. He was found by his horse and had been kicked by it. And so immediately the townsfolk began to talk about, oh, well, this is a strange instance. One is fine, two is very suspicious. And so she was immediately charged for the crime, and through various criminal trials, or quick criminal trial, she was sentenced and or she was found guilty and sentenced. However, at the very same time, New France was kind of pulling out, and the British regime was moving in, as we know with Canadian history. And so her punishment, which would have been a little less severe based on the circumstances of her crime, became a ability, they became a sort of a chip for the new regime to use as an example of their power over law and order. So she was sentenced to hang, and then also sentenced to exposure, which meant her body was going to be hanged in a gibbet out where townsfolk could see it as an example of, hey, don't murder people. And so that was it. I mean, she was the body with the corpse was there for a long time. It was pulled down and was later buried. And then now over the next 250 years, sensationalism happened, and the woman, she murdered 5 of her husbands. She was, in various vicious ways. At one point in time, because she was a murderer, she couldn't be buried in the main cemetery. There was a road construction that was going on. They found her gibbet, but they didn't find much of her remains in it. So the thought was that, well, if this is the gibbet, but she's not there, where is she? She's running around the countryside, sort of causing harm and damage. And it's just such a sensational tale, and has so many different, I guess, levels to it in terms of like what we think about, women, what we think about punishment, what we think about, all of these different things that the layers and the sensationalism and the evolution of it really fascinate me. I also did include on the following page, the following spread, the true story of her, because I feel that we need to know that that needs to be part of the tale. She was not this ravaging, or sort of angry skeleton corpse in a gibbet running around the countryside, grabbing people. So I do have folks that I know that are in one tribe or another. And I have spoken to them about some of these tales, specifically the Wendigo. And I tried to include tales in the book obviously of an indigenous nature, because you cannot tell the story of North America, obviously, without those who were here from the get-go. But I did try to select tales that were more common uh, in the whole sort of culture as a whole. So stories that were not necessarily ones that are sort of held dear or held as sacred tales by the indigenous folks here in North America. But that said, yes, we have in Madison specifically, the Ho-Chunk are here, and I have spoken to a few of them at the university and in Baraboo, just north of Madison. Yeah, but the tales I feel that I selected have often been sensationalized as well, whether it be in the cinema or in magazines or books. And I tried to sort of tell. I told the stories of these particular characters or creatures or fables as accurately as possible to the indigenous cultures that they come from. I do. I do believe that we have here in Wisconsin um, an incredibly rich um, sort of culture and folklore, and there's several theories to it. The rational theory is that it's because of the diverse amount of cultures that came here. We had the Cornish in Mineral Point. In fact, that's why we're called the Badger State. There was lead mining there, and it was the Cornish miners who came and started to dig their mines directly into the hills. And then as winter came, they just resided in them. So some of the more or less blue collarish journalists that lived in the Mineral Point area, which is just southwest of here, started to refer to them as badgers. So because they were clambering in and out of their little mines like badgers coming out of a den. But yeah, so we had the Cornish in Mineral Point. We had Germans. We had Scandinavians. We have a tremendous indigenous culture here. And as well, the French started coming down through the Hudson Bay and into the Great Lakes as early as I think the late 1500s, early 1600s, and kind of crossing the state, furring. There's even thought that it was possible that the Vikings made it all the way down into the Great Lakes in the 900s. So the rational explanation for Wisconsin's strangeness is the vast kind of unpopulated land, as well as the folks who settled here. The other take is that Wisconsin is sort of where plates in North America kind of meet. So you have sort of at a breaking point up by the city of Eau Claire and Menominee and Wausau, the the North American Shield, which is a massive kind of plate of granite and hard stone, and it's ancient. It's an ancient rock, ancient bit of rock. And then you have sort of smashing into it down here, another plate that's mostly limestone and has a wonderful aquifer. There's tons of lead, there's tons of galena and dolomite, calcium or crystals. What am I thinking of? Quartz, that's the word, quartz crystals. And so kind of spiritualists and folks who follow that believe that both of those stones make for sort of conduit or a sort of battery or reservoir for spiritual activity and sort of a thing that draws in paranormal or unusual activity. So I know in Platteville, Wisconsin, where I'm from, the entire bedrock is limestone, and there's underwater aquifers throughout the area. In fact, in my childhood, we regularly had a spring that would just sort of well up in our backyard, which was right in the middle of a town of 10,000 people. Especially flowing water, right? So we also had, there's like I said, limestone has quartz in it. Also, dolomite and lead, all very conductive or supposedly conductive materials. And in fact, in my hometown and around the entire southwest corner of the state, there's tons of mines that still exist. You'll often have someone's backyard collapse into the lead mine that was dug underneath their property some 200 years ago. Oh yeah. So yeah, talking about a rabbit hole, I could easily drop down one with you right now. Yeah, I have a great respect for spirits and the supernatural. I grew up, obviously, I believe the back of the book says, in a house with ghosts, with spirits present. There were at least two that were consistent, and one that seemed to visit a woman who resided in one room, and a man that kind of made his way throughout the house, and then an elderly spirit that would actually announce its intentions to come in. I have a wonderful story of my mom and my sister sitting sort of in a back nook in our kitchen that had a American house patio door that opened up into the backyard. And as they were sitting there one mid-morning, out of nowhere, they heard in this elderly spirit's voice, clearly as anyone else, knock, 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 may I come in? And they both looked at each other and looked at the door and looked back at each other, and there's nobody there. And it was this wonderful kind of tale that is wonderful now, but terrifying at the time. But we moved into that house when I was 6, and these were not the spirits of cinema. These weren't like the rotting corpse walking around the house or banging on things, but they did make their presence felt. Whether it was just weight or pressure, or just a sort of a darker veil over what we were looking at, or at least in my experience, how I was seeing the home. So I don't dabble in any of that in my adult life. I definitely write about it, but as far as seeking them out, doing a seance, doing a Ouija board, doing any of that kind of stuff, it's not for me. I choose to not open the door to let anyone in or anything in. And if I have been at a place, there obviously Madison is a very old city, and there are friends' houses or even different places in town where you sometimes feel a presence. One of the things I do is I cross water, and luckily we have a lot of of water sources in various rivers, the Yahara River, the Starkweather River, and the 4 lakes here, that it's not very hard to find a bridge to cross. I do. I have yes, I have a lot of books. There is quite a wealth of material at the University of Wisconsin Library as well. Um, I'm friends with or an acquaintances with several of the professors that are over there. And So yes, through books, obviously research online. You can do so much through this whole realm here. But I mean, it started with just sort of compiling the list. I had 75 stories that are in the book. And I think uh, as I started to narrow down from there, I may have had upwards of 175 stories that were in consideration. Um, and so as I started to kind of collect these tales and these folk, stories from around all of North America, I started to sort of shift them into regions and collections and tried to find ones that would cover all of the different areas of this vast continent. But yeah, the research was through various methods online. I spoke to some people, I spoke to folks about some of the tales, especially with some of the foreign language. I'm not necessarily a fluent speaker in those, although I do know enough to be somewhat communicative in French and Spanish. I don't know it as well as uh, probably should. So in those cases, I sought folks out to sort of help me make sure I wasn't misspeaking in those languages. Yeah, I mean, I think that that is that's fascinating as well. It's very much universal, actually. Even here in Wisconsin, there was an article that was published in the late 1800s that essentially said it was about lake monsters, and it talked about a few of the various lake monsters that had been reported in Wisconsin. We have over 15,000 lakes in our state. And the summary or the end result of the article was that if your lake does not have a monster in it, no one's going to come and visit. So suddenly, late 1800s, there was just this spring, this massive increase in the number of lake monsters and sightings in Wisconsin uh, for tourism. So I do think that that's fascinating. I mean, I think you're getting you're basically hitting right on kind of the genre of folk horror, which is not really that old. I was working on the book. I did a little research into just that phrase or that term, and it was really only came into existence as an idea in like the late 70s or early 70s. And it was it was about an article being written about a movie. I think it was Blood on the Devil's Claw. I can't remember the exact movie. I have it somewhere. But it was kind of mentioned at that time, and it kind of was like, oh, that's a neat concept. That's a neat idea. And it kind of and went away. And it didn't really pop back up until the aughts, early the mid 2000s, when someone wrote an article again about that movie, and the director was being interviewed, and he talked about how that particular movie and cinema and the movement at the time, there was tons of folk horror that came out at that time, and it's basically that same idea, taking bits and pieces and cutting out little sections of a people or a culture's kind of folklore or their folk beliefs, their culture, and sort of spinning a new tale out of it. You see that in modern um, cinema as like Midsummer or Midsummer. Blair Witch Project has an entire genre of movies that came out of it. And so yeah, I do think that that's fascinating, sensationalizing either a character or a story or a cryptid that's either local or regional or belongs to another culture, and turning it into something bigger. That's kind of what I try to avoid with much of what I put in here. I tried to stick with sort of the true origin and true nature of all of the creatures. But in some cases, some of those creatures are already sensationalized. So I think one of them would be High Hat, which is was the character out in the Finger Lakes area. He was sort of a story that was told by the indigenous folks out there. The forgetting the people, but he also came into being seen by folks that were settling there, developing the area, and sort of like being a keeper of the natural resources there. That Yeah, that would be very, very fun. It'd be neat to kind of even just have one with the pins in it as a photograph. But uh, I do like maps. I have drawn a few, but I tend to enjoy the illustration of the creatures themselves more. Um, just I have a fondness with sculpting the hair with lines. You can see that obviously on the Wendigo on the front of the book, and on the various Sasquatches or Yeti inside the book as well. Yes, and horns too. I'm also a big fan of horns. Thank you for that. That's very kind. Uh, I have a lot of the books you were just describing where it's, it's almost like a tour book, or yeah, a tour book to finding the cryptid, basically. Where it's like, oh, okay, so here's where it's been seen, this is how it's been seen, this is what it does, and this is, um, how it behaves, and if this should happen, you should run. But and so when I set out on this, I very much wanted it to be as if you were hearing these stories uh, for the very first time. And so I wanted them to be the tales to sort of give you I wanted to give the facts of each tale as within the story itself, I guess. And so that's what I set out to do. And I think as I began kind of kicking them around, obviously the location, or the sort of environment that these tales lived in was such a huge part of their story, that I had to sort of develop that environment where I was about to begin speaking about these different entities. So that's where I kind of started rolling that around. And two, I think um, myself, I wanted to tell the story as a story and not as sort of like a nuts and bolts type thing. I respect those a lot because there's a lot of research that goes in the nuts and bolts and that kind of stuff. But as a folklorist, we're not so much interested in facts uh, of the story as much as we are interested in what the telling of the story says about the people telling it. So I very much wanted to kind of give the story as the original folks who told it, but obviously sort of make it my own as well. Thankfully, I have not had any encounters with any of the creatures. But I've definitely throughout my lifetime spent a lot of time, or a lot of time in places that are very remote. It's not very hard, uh, from Madison, we're really only, well, I mean, there's wild places within the city of Madison itself. There's places where you can find, 5, 6, 10 acres of unpopulated area for walks. We have the the University Arboretum is a case in point. But two, if you want to find really remote areas, you only have to drive, an hour or so out of the city, and you'll be in it. And so friends of mine live on farms, and we've had, recently they do a Labor Day, which was just this last weekend, bonfire and camp over. And I didn't go this year, but in years past, it gets very dark out in the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin very quickly. Even with the farmhouse, or the barn, or some other stuff nearby, you're very quickly in the middle of nowhere. So, and those places, even when you don't have an encounter of any kind, can feel sort of lonely and desolate, and sort of ominous. So. So much of New England's, and I love their culture. I've been out there regularly. Uh, uh, Maine in particular is one of my favorite places. They have a lot of tales and story and folklore and myth, and frightening stories. I mean, Salem, for instance, with the witch trials, and still, the haunting of the city by the witches. Um, they deserve to haunt you if you killed them. um, but I think a lot of those are very well known and often told. And I have in the back of my brain this idea of doing sort of like the legacy, or the sort of like the common legends of America, and hitting, like the Jersey Devil and the Snallygaster and Sasquatch again, and Champ in Lake Champlain, and all of those sort of like well-known ones, and just, creating them in my own image and telling them in my own voice. But I think where I went with the stories I selected was finding ones that were have had less light shown on them. And so in a way, they could be a little bit more scary, a little bit more frightening. Yeah, there are there's several stories in there. And I think that the the nature of the book is a bit deceptive, because it's illustration and it's story, and it's, those broadsheet or broadside pages as well, that are sort of, these easily digestible bits of information. And even my stories, I think, are somewhat quick and fast reads. 1 page, 2 page tales. There's sort of perception that it might be good for kids. But at the same time, you quickly read a few of them and realize, oh, this is mainly for us. This is for us, for we who love very, very scary stories. Cool. Yeah, and I mean too, many of them do, not all of them obviously, but many of them do kind of end up with sort of that little twist at the end that is a lesson for it. Like I'm thinking of the tale from Greenland. Sorry, I'm able to sort of pronounce the words when I see them, not necessarily pronounce them when they're just in my head. But uh, yes, the Tupalak, the sort of like Gollum type stitched together creature that is made to seek out revenge or vengeance of the person who has created it. Um, and the story there is that the person who creates it is obviously has power over it, and has the ability to tell it, yes, to tell it where to go and what to do, and what vengeance to sort of act out upon their enemy. or someone who has offended them. But at the same time, if that person is able to find a way to connect with that creature as it comes to act out on them, they can turn it around and send it back to the person. And so we see there how, this sort of intent for vengeance, or this intent to act out against somebody that's wronged you in one way or another, in many cases ends up coming back to hurt you in the end. So I love those kind of stories. But then too, there's lots of tales in there that are just scary for the fact of being scary. Yes, thank you. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.